Welcome back to Square Off. Democratic Senator Mark Kelly is running for a full 6-year term in November. His opponent will be political newcomer Blake Masters of Tucson. He's a Trump-endorsed candidate who defeated 4 rivals in the Republican primary. Masters was backed by more than $10 million from his former boss, Silicon Valley billionaire Peter Thiel. So, who is Peter Thiel? How deep is his connection to Masters? And what does Peter Thiel want? Longtime tech journalist Max Chafkin of Bloomberg Businessweek wrote the book on Thiel. It's called The Contrarian, Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. Max Chafkin joins us now from Connecticut. Welcome to Square Off.
Hi.
So let's start with Peter Thiel himself. He isn't a household name like Mark Zuckerberg, but there might not be a Mark Zuckerberg without Peter Thiel. What has Thiel's role been in the tech companies that a lot of folks are familiar with?
Yeah, absolutely. So Thiel is probably one of the most, if not the most, important tech investors of the past 20, 25 years. He co-founded the company PayPal, which of course is a pioneering e-commerce company. And then after that kind of spread his wings in Silicon Valley, became the leader of what's became known as the PayPal Mafia. And in doing so, invested in many of the companies people have heard of, including, as you said, Facebook. He was a mentor to Mark Zuckerberg. He also co-founded Palantir, which is a large defense contractor. And he, became very close with Elon Musk. He's a major backer of Elon Musk's rocket company, SpaceX. So the list goes on and on. He's like one of the key power brokers, if not the key power broker in tech.
So pretty good guy for Blake Masters to be with. What's the connection between the two of them?
So for the last, decade or so, Blake Masters has been, for lack of a better word, Peter Thiel's right-hand man. He has served as sort of an extension, a de facto chief of staff for pretty much everything Thiel has done, including writing his business memoir. But Blake Masters, kind of his first thing was to co-author this book, 0 to 1. And as Thiel sort of became closer in Trump world, Blake Masters came along with him. So during the Trump presidential transition in 2016, Blake Masters was there in Trump Tower working with Peter Thiel, trying to help, the former president find positions to fill the government.
And you mentioned 0 to 1. That became an enormous bestseller. Blake Masters took the notes from a class he took or a seminar with Peter Thiel at Stanford, and the two of them turned it into a book. Is that right?
Yeah, so Blake Masters was basically a law student, and Peter Thiel guest taught this class at Stanford Law School, or at Stanford, I'm sorry. And Blake Masters started taking notes, and those notes, which are basically just summaries of these lectures that Thiel was giving about his career and about his sort of philosophy on how to start companies, went viral and then became this book. Masters and Thiel, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say. So the book was very successful. Masters did step down earlier this year amid questions about how long he would stay on the job. He had 2 jobs with Peter Thiel. A lot of folks might be wondering, given that he spent largely his whole adult life after university with Peter Thiel, where would Blake Masters be today if Thiel hadn't entered the picture?
So, I mean, he wouldn't be running for Senate, and he wouldn't be as wealthy or as influential as he is. I mean, he very much hitched his wagon to Thiel and has rode it for everything. I mean, not only, all of his business experience, but of course, all of his political experience. Now, I think you have to give Blake Masters credit. I mean, one of the difficult things in business or in life is finding a good mentor, and clearly he found that.
So, what is the shared philosophy or ideology? Because Peter Thiel is about a lot more than just making money.
Thiel is kind of the guy who came up with what you might think of as the cult of disruption. Now, this is the idea that tech startups should kind of break the rules. Thiel is very interested in kind of making the future happen, and his idea is that these tech companies need to shake things up. And that not only is it sort of excusable for a tech entrepreneur to maybe bend or break the rules, but that's better. And, as we've seen Masters' campaign, he's been using this phrase, we can't win while following the speed limit as conservatives, right? He's urging conservatives to be more muscular, more aggressive. And that very much comes, I think, out of the Peter Thiel startup philosophy.
And see, Peter Thiel collected, from reading your book, collected a lot of young men like Blake Masters around him, similar ideologies. And I wonder where you see Thiel's influence or that kind of group sensibility in what we've learned about Masters over the last several months as he's campaigned, things like sort of praising the Unabomber.
Well, so you have a couple things going on there. One is that Thiel is this committed contrarian. He's very much the kind of like dorm room, disagree, say the crazy thing and get a rise out of people. And I think that is part of the influence that's caused Masters to kind of commit some of these gaffes because, or assuming he thinks of them as gaffes, because if you're in the Peter Thiel circle, right, praising the Unabomber, that's a great way to kind of get a good laugh and make friends, of course. But in politics, you generally don't want to be praising the writings of, say, a mass murderer. And I think that is one of the areas where perhaps there's been a learning curve for Masters. But it also gets to, opponents might have problems here because, the things that make you a good investor, being contrary, bending the rules, are not necessarily the things that voters want in a national lawmaker, a U.S. senator.
So Peter Thiel came to Donald Trump's side at the lowest point of his campaign after the Access Hollywood controversy in October, I think a month before the election in 2016. What did Thiel see in Trump?
Thiel saw, first of all, I think somebody who had a really good chance of winning. And Thiel has been sort of attached to these kind of like far right online movements, and Masters been a part of that really for a decade or so before Trump came along. And I think what Thiel saw is kind of a low risk bet, right? Trump was basically written off. Thiel was able to write this $1 million check, as you said, at the lowest point probably of Trump's campaign, right after the Access Hollywood tape came out, and that got him right in the door. But I also do think Thiel and Masters, very much embraced the kind of hardcore version of Trumpism. For the book, I talked to Steve Bannon, who was the CEO of the Trump campaign, briefly worked in the White House, and he said that Thiel was too extreme for us, and Masters and Thiel were basically further to the right than Trump. So I think they really went for it. They really saw kind of ideological kinship with Trump.
Did they also see, Peter Thiel in particular, a business opportunity? He has a company called Palantir that does data mining for the government. Did they see some money there, perhaps?
Well, I think they would deny that, their activities in the White House had anything to do with business. But Thiel's entire career, and Masters, of course, worked for him, has been about kind of the combination of business and politics. And Palantir did exceedingly well. So this is a large software company. They have billions of dollars in contracts, primarily with the Defense Department, other branches of government, and they did exceedingly well during the Trump presidency. So you can say, oh, maybe that's politics. Maybe that's because Peter Thiel, important Trump supporter, is the largest shareholder of the company, or perhaps the company was just doing well. But either way, the political move did very well for Peter Thiel's business and for, of course, Blake Masters' business.
So the subtitle of the book is Silicon Valley's Pursuit of Power. Peter Thiel is also funding a second Senate candidate, J.D. Vance, in Ohio. If Vance and Masters win, Peter Thiel would have as many senators as the state of California. What does Peter Thiel want from J.D. Vance and Blake Masters if they get to the Senate?
I think what Thiel wants are many of the same things that other very wealthy people want, right? Money to grow their wealth and preserve their wealth, and political influence. And Thiel's somebody who's very much combined those two things throughout his career. You look at the platforms from Masters and J.D. Vance, right? They're running as these Trumpy populists, right? They want to build the wall, cancel culture, and so on. All that's very much in line with the sort of Trump movement. They're also kind of disconcertingly really pro-crypto. And you might ask yourself, like, who is the constituency? Are there a lot of, populist Trump voters who really care about crypto? And the answer is, of course, no. But there is one very important populist Trump voter who is Peter Thiel, who is, the main patron for both of those two. So I think we will see them, find ways to defend his business interests. In other words, helping tech startups, tax policy that favors people like Peter Thiel. And of course, it never hurts to have the ear of a couple of U.S. senators, especially in a very closely divided Senate, which is what we expect will happen.
The book is The Contrarian by Max Chafkin. I highly recommend it. Thank you so much for joining us, Max.
Thanks for having me.